Hey guys, it's Patch. I thought it was about time I did a video on the coup de grace of my backpacking gear, which is the tent. This is the Zpacks Altaplex DCF one-person truck and pole single wall backpacking tent, which is a lot. This has been like my dream tent for ages. I've had it for about a year now, maybe. And yeah, it took me a long time to pull the trigger on this, mainly because of the cost. If you know anything about backpacking or anything, you'll know the DCF comes with a hefty price tag. Specifically, this tent on the Zpacks website is $675 US. That's pretty much the same in pounds at the moment, which isn't great, but yeah, when I got this, I think it was about £450. You know, and if you don't have a way to sidestep like import fees, if you're not getting someone to like pick it up for you and bring it back, because obviously it's not obviously, but it's an American company. So yeah, if you're getting it shipped over to the UK or any other country, then you have to pay the import fees that come with that. So, you know, cost is a massive thing, obviously. So that's something that I thought I should put it out there, like straight away. This is an expensive tent, like best part of $700 US. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money, any way you slice it. But the reason why it costs so much, hopefully, will become clear. So the primary reason of the cost is that it uses DCF. So DCF, Dyneema composite fabric, previously called Cuban fiber. Cuban fiber used to use, or still does use, this fabric for like racing yacht sails, because it's super light, really good under tension, and yet people started realizing that it would also be good for ultralight backpacking stuff, which is a bit niche, but there you go. In 2015, Dyneema bought the rights to the fabric, and now it's called Dyneema kind of across the board. And that's like the generic umbrella term for it. So, different fabric compared to normal tents, or the majority of tents, which use sil nylon or sil poly. So, previous tents I've had, the Lanshan 2, the Wild Country Zephyrus 1, both sil nylon. And the differences between, as a quick segue, not the specific tents, but the fabrics. Dyneema is naturally waterproof, whereas sil nylon and sil poly aren't, and they basically need to be treated with chemicals to proof them. Yeah, for those of you thinking, I do have my notes on my hand. This is a professional outfit, and I take it seriously. Which basically means that if you haven't proofed your sil nylon, sil poly tent in a while, or if it isn't completely like 100% proofed, then that fabric will take on water, which then, so you've been sleeping in your tent overnight, it's been raining, your tent isn't fully proofed, even though you're not wet, your tent will have soaked up some of that water, and that water will stay in the tent when you pack it up and carry it out. So that water weight is added to the weight of the tent, essentially, when you think about it. Water weighs a lot, so you're going to be adding a good few hundred grams of water, depending on how wet it is, obviously, and how big your tent is. Conversely, Dyneema is naturally waterproof, so any water that is on it in the morning can just be either wiped off or shaken off, and the actual fabric won't have retained any water. So throughout the day, you don't need to get it out on your breaks and like hang it over a tree branch to let it like air out and dry out. It's just as is. The weight of it is the weight of it. Other point to note, Dyneema versus sil poly or sil nylon, is that you can basically put as much tension through this as you want, and it won't really break. So one of the properties of it being good for a sailing sail is its tension under stress. So when you're pulling it out using your tent stakes or whatever, your guy lines, you can basically put it as much as you want, and it's not going to rip. That's not a challenge. I'm just saying that's like a benefit. Whereas sil nylon, it's like a bit stretchier, so it will like stretch to a point and then it will tear. It's not like it's not like Kevlar, you know. If you take a knife to it, it's still going to get a hole, but just the actual pulling out, you can basically make it as tight as you want, and it's not going to rip that easily. Also, when it gets wet, unlike sil nylon, it won't sag. So again, you might have noticed in the morning with your sil nylon tent, if it's wet, even though the night before you pulled it out fully and it was tight, in the morning it will sag a bit and might be like coming in, touching like your head of your sleeping bag or your foot or like any of your kit inside. This, if you pull it out tight, when you wake up, it'll still be just as tight, which is good, because with a backpacking tent, you want to maximize the space inside the tent, you know, so you don't want it getting smaller throughout the night, essentially. So yeah, that's basically it with Dyneema versus sil nylon and sil poly. Apart from obviously there's a massive weight saving. Obviously it depends on the denier of fabric you're using, but for instance, this tent weighs, so one person's single wall trekking pole backpacking tent in Dyneema, this weighs 437 grams or 15.4 ounces. If you compare that to the Lanshan 1 Pro, which is a budget tent, but sil nylon, single person, trekking pole, backpacking tent, same, but in sil nylon, that weighs best part 700 grams. I think it's 690 grams. So you know, good few hundred grams saved there, just for having the different fabric, and also this is designed for taller people than the Lanshan, so it's a bigger tent as well. So you've got to take that into account. So yeah, weight, waterproofness, strength under tension, and likelihood of sagging in the morning. Those are kind of the main differences with Dyneema versus sil nylon. So back to the actual tent. So Zpacks is the company I bought this from, US company. All their tents or shelters are made of Dyneema. This one specifically, the kind of USP of this one is it's designed for taller hikers, so it can take people up to 6'6". I'm 6'1", and there's plenty of room, like at the foot, at the head. You know, even though it's kind of a tight, like a one-person tent, it doesn't really follow the rules of tents, where you kind of halve the amount of people that it says with kit. So if it says most tents, if it says it's a two-person tent, it's a one-person tent with kit type thing. But this, plenty of room, and I believe it could probably take up to 6'6". So if you're freakishly tall, then this is a good option if you're looking for a DCF tent. So I mentioned that it's a trekking pole tent. You need a particularly tall or long trekking pole to actually set this up, because it's designed for taller hikers. You need a taller kind of apex of the tent for it to have the base wide enough or long enough for a taller hiker to sleep. So you need a trekking pole that will extend to at least 56 inches or 142 centimeters. At the same time, because the trekking poles I already had didn't do that, I ordered this Zpacks carbon fiber trekking pole, and basically when I extend this fully, it is tall enough. You know, if you're not a trekking pole user, there are alternatives which I'll mention later, but you know, single trekking pole as opposed to two, winner for me. So yeah, you've got to have a tall enough trekking pole for it, but you know, that's something you can easily check. Zpacks do a trekking pole extender, which is like it's like a tube with like a base on it, carbon fiber, and it basically sits there like that, and it cups whatever trekking pole you're using, and basically adds about that much height onto it. But I don't know how tall it is, but basically enough for you to use use any trekking pole with this tent. You know, so it's another thing to carry, and you might just want to wear out your trekking pole and then just buy a new trekking pole type thing, you know. Okay, so some pros of this tent specifically. So aside from the pros of DCF, which I've already kind of gone through, the weight, the waterproofness, the strength, etc. The pros of this tent are the actual space you have inside it. Like I mentioned previously, big enough for a tall hiker, but it's also got ample room for a kind of backpacking bag, up to kind of maybe 45 litres. You've got plenty of space, but also, and that's inside the tent, but also you've got a massive vestibule, or porch bit, if you want to be fancy. So you can, if you don't want your like bag or shoes or whatever inside your tent, you've got loads of room inside the outer wall, but outside the mesh bit of the tent. I think I probably will do another video like in the field where I can kind of show you around and show you the bits of this tent actually set up. But just for this, I just want to talk through the pros and cons, etc. It's just much easier and much more controlled when I'm like at home. I can't set this up here because I can't put tent poles into the floor or tent stakes into the floor, you know. So another pro for me of this tent is, it could be a con for some people, so I'm kind of putting it in the middle, is that DCF is kind of like this thickness of DCF is kind of a little translucent, so you can kind of see quite a lot of light coming into the tent. Whereas a lot of tents, if they're like dark green or whatever, it feels like you're in a bit of a coffin. But here, like the sun will can get you up nicely. You can kind of see the skyline around you through the fabric. On the flip side of that, it could be a con because you can kind of see from the outside into the tent. You can't obviously see massive detail or anything, but you could see that someone was in the tent. Obviously, if you think about it, if you see a tent set up in the middle of nowhere, you assume that someone's in there. But a lot of people, they might not want someone basically seeing them in there, especially if they're like female or whatever, potentially. I'll put a picture up now and you can basically see my orange quilt through the tent. I don't really mind it because it's basically airier and lighter inside the tent, but yeah, I'll leave that up to you. With the heightened trekking pole that you need to use, you can also, it basically means you can sit up fully, or tall people can sit up fully in the tent, which sounds like a really minor thing, but when you're kind of cooking or just sorting stuff out and you're like hunched over in a small tent, it's really annoying, and it's such a minor thing, but it makes a big difference with this, where you can just sit up fully because you've got that kind of tall apex in the middle of the tent. Yeah, appreciate that. This tent takes or has 10 peg out points, stake out points. It can use a minimum of 6, so 1 on each corner of the base, and then 1 on each halfway down each of the long sides. That basically provides the tension for the trekking pole to keep it upright fully, so it's not waving around. So that's like your minimum would be 6, and maximum would be 10. If you're in a particularly windy area, anyway. I use these, which are the stakes I actually got with the Lanshan 2. They're fine for the time being. I think one of them's slightly starting to bend, but they're fine. To be honest, I don't really need the last 2. I could obviously, like I said, make it with 6, but if you lose one, if one breaks, bends, whatever, it's kind of a redundancy. And basically what I do is I stake out guy lines that are around the head area or the head end of the tent, and it basically just provides a little more space, pulling the sidewalls out. But like I said before, there's plenty of room inside, even if you are using 6. Unless you're an absolute unit, you're not going to be filling up the base of this tent too much. Even if you had like a 5 centimeter sleeping pad, and a really lofty quilt or sleeping bag, you're not going to be kind of touching the end wall. The foot box is going to be getting that wet. The last pro I'll mention of this tent is the kind of ventilation. So when this is set up, the walls are kind of a good 8 inches maybe. Yeah, 6-8 inches off the ground, which basically lets air fully in, fully out. So that basically aids in ventilation and combats condensation. Because it's a single wall tent, your breath is going straight onto the wall that's onto the outside, essentially. So that's hot air going onto a cold surface, and it's going to condense. But the added ventilation basically means the warm air that you're breathing out and kind of radiating can kind of escape, and it's not a hot box, for want of a better phrase, inside, so you're not going to get as wet on the inside, essentially. So yeah, they've done a good job with making a single wall tent that actually doesn't have that much condensation, and from my own experience, it isn't. Is it? No, there's negligible difference between this and something like the Wild Country Zephyrus 1 or the Lanchem 2, which are double wall tents. So yeah, really good. Even though it's a single wall tent, the ventilation basically means that it doesn't condense any worse than a double wall tent for me. And with that ventilation, you might think that you get a bit of a draft, but on the bottom of the tent there's a 8-inch bathtub, so there's 8 inches of wall, basically, kind of containing you, 20 centimeters in new money. So basically, the wind comes in, but it's not going to get onto you because you've got that bathtub kind of around you, protecting you. And while 8 inches doesn't seem like a lot, it does make a difference. I haven't really noticed any like that much draftiness with this. So yeah, good design, thought through. Someone's been paid money and has designed a good tent. Nice. Yeah, so that's basically all the pros I can think of. I'll just go through a couple of cons. These aren't actually necessarily ones that I've experienced, but you know, they're worth mentioning anyway. So an issue some people have with this tent is in the mesh. There's kind of like a mosquito mesh inside that kind of locks you off from the vestibule, and that's like a big rainbow door. So instead of having a door that kind of comes down like that and you zip it out and then roll it up, the mesh kind of rainbows off and then just falls down. So you need to remember to put that like on the inside of the tent, otherwise it's just on the mud in the like wetness, whatever, and it's going to get a bit grim. People don't really like that because it's just like admin. Like people like rolling the door up, it's just out the way. But it's one fewer thing to do, so it's, you know, it's a double-edged sword. Another con I'd say is that because it's a single trekking pole tent, it's reasonably difficult to set up. You know, you get the hang of it. Like it's not that bad, but the first time you got to kind of think about what you're doing. There's a really good video by Darwin, which I'll link down below. Basically talks through how to set it up, so I won't bother with that. You require the tent pegs or rocks if you're in a pinch to actually have the tension to set it up. You can't just set it up anyway. You can't set it up on hard standing. You've got to be able to put that tension through the fabric, because it's not a freestanding tent. If you had one that was like a square with 10 poles that go across, you can just put that anywhere, no dramas. But here, you know, you're going to have to put these pegs in the ground. Not an issue for me because there's plenty of kind of you know, green areas, whatnot, in the UK. But depending on where you're hiking, you know, I'll leave that up to you. Last thing I'll mention is the noise. With DCF, it's kind of like a bit of a crinkly fabric. You know, this is mega minor, but people might not like it, especially in high winds. The sound of it. I mean, you're going to get sound with any tent, obviously the more tension you put through the fabric, and I mentioned you can put in as much as you want, as much as you can, then the less it's going to be kind of like shaking or luffing, whatever. It's like the Thermarest Neo X Lite. It's the same kind of thing. It's like a bit of a crinkly noise. There you go. So those are the pros and cons. I hope I didn't labour that too much. I just want to stress here that you've got two ways of looking at this. So I bought this tent with my own money. So a company hasn't given it to me. I'd love that. But a company hasn't given it to me to review. So there's no kind of bias in that sense. I'm not trying to like please them. They're not saying, oh, can we say this, please? I bought it with my own money. It's my own honest opinion. But you've also got to think that I've spent a lot of money on it. So even if it was really bad, which it's not, I might be kind of selling it a bit more because I've spent that much money on it, like buyer's remorse type thing. So bit of a catch-22. But yeah, personally, I'm loving this tent at the moment. It's great, suits me down to the ground, fits in my bag perfectly. Yeah, it's perfect. It's exactly what I hoped it would be, and yeah, I hope to use it for many years to come. Whether you should buy this or not, I can't say. It all comes down to if the benefits meet your budget. You know, it is a high budget. If you're going to be using it enough, then I'd say if you're a tall hiker who walks or sleeps alone in a tent, uses one trekking pole, and has a reasonably small bag or a bag that will fit this well and cares about weight, then it suits you. But you know, I'll leave the judgment of whether it's actually worth the money down to you, and that is a big decision because, like I said at the beginning, that's a lot. That's a lot of money. So yeah, that's that complete. Like I said, I'll probably do a video in the future with it all set out, and I'll show you around the bits of it. But just talking through the pros and cons, what it is, how it's working for me, that's that. So thank you very much for watching. If you've got any questions or comments, please put them down below. Do my best to answer them as best I can. And wait out for the next video.